It suddenly got a little quieter. I guess that means it's class time. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see y'all this morning. I still can't believe it's just now hitting early March and we're already in the 70s, but hey, that's weather for you. It's good to be before y'all again. We are starting a new study. If you're joining us after a while, we are just finished up our study of David and Solomon, which was wonderfully done by Josh Yancey. And so now we are starting a whole new year of different studies. And so we are starting with the first one, which when Baxter first approached me and asked me to do this class, he said it wasn't textually based, meaning we're not going to go through one specific book and look at every aspect of it. I'm not going to lie, I kind of panicked. I went, there goes all the structure that I could possibly have to kind of lean on and have that going forward. So now what we're going to be studying here is not just one book of the Bible, it's an idea. And wouldn't you know it, if you look at the front of the book here, it says the study is about the Godhead. And, I was excited for this. Looking into this, the more and more that I read, that I studied, that I looked into what we were going to be looking at, it really, it's daunting, but it was exciting that Baxter trusted me enough to do something like this, but also that I get to be up here and I get to do this. So we are going to be studying the Godhead. So our first little lesson there, it starts off with a word. It starts off with the word Trinity. And it talks a lot about that at first. And it also makes the point that Trinity is not a word that exists in the original Jewish or Greek lexicon. It is actually a word that was attributed much, much later, post kind of all the writings of the Bible. But what I wanted to start off with class this morning was I actually wanted to ask y'all a question, not a rhetorical question, but what does Trinity mean to you? When we refer to the Trinity, what does that mean? Yeah.
God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
Exactly. It's the three aspects of the Lord that are mentioned quite often. In fact, not necessarily even explained as three separate beings or even one being who's split in three parts. Where we kind of start to drift into that idea of three is specifically a verse, and I remember it's right at the beginning of my study book here. If we remember in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 12, the writer says, "A threefold cord is not quickly broken." And in the original context of that verse, it was speaking more about people working together, people like the faith holding together isn't quickly led astray, how that threefold cord holds together. If you know how rope works, rope is not just one strand of material that is just really, really strong. It's actually at least two, sometimes three, many, many pieces of fabric that are wound together, that are braided in such a way that it can hold exponentially more than just one piece of cord ever could. And so they set up that likeness here because the way that we think about God is not necessarily one being who's made stronger because they're three different pieces, but a being who is so powerful and so strong that the aspects of him make up three different ways that God affects our lives. And so that's kind of the overview of what we're going to be studying here. We're going to be studying God and the different aspects attributed to God the Father. We're going to talk about Jesus, how he is the physical manifestation of God, how Jesus redeems us, saves us, and all the different aspects that we attribute to Jesus. And then at the very end, we are going to talk about the Holy Spirit and what kind of things the Holy Spirit is described as doing, what it does in our lives, and things like that. So over the next quarter, we're going to be looking at the different aspects, but the first one we're going to start on, which is the one probably that is the most directly referenced throughout the entire Bible, is God the Father. So, if you read through our first lesson, you know that we're going to start with God the Creator. Oh boy. we're jumping into maybe one of the most unfathomable aspects of God the Father himself, right smack at the beginning. But I think we do that just to kind of set up the idea of how amazing God is, and how this study, as we're going to look at it, is just dipping our toe into the millions of trillions of gallons of the ocean that is God and his power. So if we want to get into it, we're going to start, where better to start when talking about God but the very, very beginning. So let's open up to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. And for most of us, this is a pretty familiar verse. This is pretty much where we start with even the children, is when we're trying to introduce them to God and the Bible and where things came from, is we start right here at the very beginning. Because if someone wants to just read the first 3 verses of Genesis chapter 1.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light.
Okay. This is one of the freakiest verses in the Bible, y'all. Not because it's supposed to instill fear, but now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, or some versions even say over the surface of the waters. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. What waters? In all this void of nothing, what were the waters? What waters was he hovering over? Because we know that there was, and as the lesson is going to go on to say, there is no beginning and there is no end without God. He created beginning and he created end. So it's just so intriguing to think about what was around God before he created our beginning. It's like, what was the void? What was this primordial soup that the Lord was hovering over before he finally decided, I want to go in a particular direction with something real quick. Let me try this. And also, as we're going to start here, we see the first thing that God does is he says, "Let there be light," and there was light. When we think of creating, when we think of building in our limited human context, what do you need to build? What do you need to create? Materials. You need ingredients. When we bake something, you need materials. You need eggs. You need flour. You need, apparently in Baxter's case, he can make an amazing loaf of bread with just water and what was the other one? Flour. That's it. And yet, we have this beautiful loaf of sourdough bread that came from water and flour and salt with lots and lots of care, but it all came from just that. However, in the case of God creating light, this thing that we can sense, we can see, we can kind of measure in a very odd way, he didn't need materials. He just said, "Let there be light," and there was light. The power of God's creation, the vastness of God the Creator, is not that he built all these things through lots of time and materials. God speaks things into existence. If we want to turn over to Psalm real quick, the psalmist has many, many things to say about God's power and glory, but some of the most interesting ways that the psalmist phrases is God's creation and how it works. So if we want to turn to Psalm chapter 33. Psalm chapter 33. And we want to start in verse 6. And if someone could just read verses 6 through 9.
By the word. Go ahead.
Okay. By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. He gathers the waters of the sea together as a heap. He lays up the deep in storehouses. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him.
And one more.
For he spoke, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast.
And there it is. The psalmist describes, by the words of the Lord the heavens were made, their starry host by the breath of his mouth. He gathers the waters of the seas into jars, and I like the way that your version puts it, gathered the waters of the deep into a heap. And he puts the deep into storehouses. Let the earth fear the Lord. Let all the people of the world revere him. For he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded, and it stood firm. Why do we fear the Lord? Because he's above it all. He doesn't need materials. He doesn't need requirements for his will to be carried out. He simply says it, and by his breath and by his words, things are. Things come to be. He puts the deep into storehouses. He has such a capacity for these things that he can take our entire ocean and just hold it in a receptacle of his making. That it is so insignificant and tiny that it is almost like it's just like a little storage thing to him. And so just the power of his words. God the Creator needs no tools, needs no materials. He simply needs his words, and it is so. In the same vein, let's turn over to Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 11. And just one verse for this one. Verse 3. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. Right here, Hebrews is acknowledging this doesn't make sense to us. Because by faith we understand the universe was formed from God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what is visible. He didn't take what was already there and make it into something new. He just made the new. Of course, we know the song of all the different things. Day one, God made light where there was none. Day 2, God made seas and skies of blue. And all throughout creation, he didn't take the light and form it into the water. He didn't take the water and create land out of it. He didn't make the animals out of the land. It just says that God spoke it into being, that we don't need to know the process. We didn't need to know if there was any kind of practice or anything in it. It was just God spoke it, and it was so. And so as we go through the study book, we see that it's kind of fun. This almost, as I was studying, this almost kind of overlapped with what I was studying for my sermon when I was talking about God's creation and its beauty, was that man has always wanted to understand, how can nothing become something? One of the leading theories of if the world wasn't created by God is that nothing exploded, the Big Bang. And that somehow that is more scientific, that we believe in the fact that we couldn't see, hear, smell, or touch nothing, and then it exploded, versus God didn't need to, we couldn't see, hear, smell, or touch God, but he spoke it and it happened. These are equal amounts of faith that we have to take it on, folks. Because there is no way to measure, to see signs of nothingness exploding. And so in a way, we are almost in the same kind of boat. We take it on faith. We have an entire book written out for us that explains the will of God and how things were and the order in which he spoke things into being, but there's no origin point. There's no place we can go to where this is where God started. This is the first point that was part of the land. We can't go and find the beginning because, again, there was no materials to find it. The way that we age the earth, we measure the carbon that's within really, really old rocks, and that gives us a date of how long it's been deteriorating. I'm not a geologist. I don't know exactly how all that works, but that's the gist of it. Yeah. But the point is, even so, they cannot find the beginning. They can find the age of something, but there's no rock in existence that will get to a point where it goes, nope, this is where everything started. It just can't be done. In the same way, we can't, there's no, and unfortunately, with Adam and Eve being removed from the Garden of Eden, we can't even find the point where everything kind of was centralized. But we take it on faith because, yeah, because we read about how the beginning was framed. Yeah.
Back to with a big explosion and that kind of stuff, but yet those who believe that now says nothing, you can't make anything from nothing.
Because nothing doesn't exist.
That's correct.
Nothing isn't a measurable thing. When we think about cold, we can say it's the lack of heat. It is the absence of heat, but it doesn't exist. We can measure how very little warm there is. In darkness, we can see that there is no light here. We can sense that there is no light here, but we can't bottle it. We can't take some kind of measurement tool and find out exactly how much nothing is here. So yes, in its own way, it's just as, not pointless, but kind of chasing your own tail to try and figure out where nothing came from, because it doesn't. Yeah.
With science, you take it back so far, and it becomes, you gotta have faith in it.
Exactly.
So,
Do y'all realize that the whole idea of gravity is still a theory? We have, well, they can say it's a law, but by the purists, I went through a whole thing on the internet. It's what the internet said. But they have been able to modify, yes, science to a degree to where they can solidify gravity, but the whole way that we measure gravity is we don't measure gravity itself, we measure its effect on other things. And the only thing I want to say here is that there are still things that are very much part of our life. We know that if I go jump off the porch of the church right here, I'm not going to fall up. But the whole idea of measuring gravity is not measuring gravity itself, but we have faith that it's going to work. Just in the same way as, again, this whole thing is not trying to draw a line between us and science. The thing that I think that we can take from this is that science will try and have you believe that there's not any faith involved, that it's all hard evidence and that you can totally take everything that it says at face value. But what I'm trying to say here is that there's a lot of faith involved in science, in testing, in trying new hypotheses and trying new ideas. They're having faith that this won't just explode. This past summer, the big movie event was Barbie and Oppenheimer at the same time. And going to see Oppenheimer was an experience, y'all, because in their measurements and measuring how splitting an atom could create this endless amount of energy, there was a 0.00 something % chance that it could just explode the entire world. That it would ignite our atmosphere and the entire world would burn up. And whether or not it was the right decision, they took it on faith that they had done enough measurements that it wasn't going to do that. And so now, moving away from the whole science debacle here, what I want us to realize is that with creation, we take it on faith. But the way that we approach faith is a lot easier than it is taking faith on science. Because our whole idea, our whole learning about creation is totally on faith. And we know faith as something that is welcome. It is something that uplifts us. It is something that gives us comfort. And so when oftentimes we try and wrap our head around God the Creator, how creation happened, we can take some comfort in knowing that the whole of God's machinations, the way that God things does, is just beyond us. That we're not going to be able to understand it, but we can see the results. The world around us is beautiful and full of amazing and some incomprehensible things. And so instead of stressing about how creation happened, we just need to enjoy and be awestruck by the creation around us that He set up for us. And the next aspect that I want to talk about is God didn't just create the world and then said, "Oh, good job." It wasn't like a stopwatch that he wound it up really, really long time and then just kind of let it do its own thing. God has had an active hand in his creation from the beginning. And so moving into that next section here is God didn't just create and dip. God empowers his creation. If you want to start turning over to the book of Isaiah. Isaiah, being the prophet during the Israelite exile, they're conquered by a neighboring kingdom, and all their people are kind of scattered to the winds, taken into captivity here and there, and they're even moved as a group from here to a different kingdom once that kingdom is taken over. But the whole time, the Israelites are having to deal with losing their homeland and being taken somewhere else. And so Isaiah warns them of this coming debacle, but they don't listen to him. And so as the exile continues, Isaiah continues to preach to his people, as some people are calling for, why would God let this happen to us? Why would God let his people be treated so? And if we go to Isaiah chapter 40, if you want to be turning over to there, I'm going to start in chapter 28. And if someone wants to read Isaiah 40 and read 28 through the end of the verse in verse 31.
Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint.
All right. So here Isaiah is being questioned by the people, is being questioned by the Israelites. How could God let this happen? Has he deserted us? Does his power not reach us so far away from our homeland where he established us? And Isaiah responds with, have you not heard? Have you not been taught this from the very beginning? The Lord is an everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He makes a comparison. Even youths grow weary. Sometimes we think about children having endless, boundless amounts of energy that they don't ever get tired. Just when it seems like they're slowing down, they have another burst of energy and they're running around the house again. But he says, even the young get tired eventually. Even the youth grow weary and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. And if you're familiar with Oklahoma Christian or attended or anything like that, you know this next part of the verse. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. God's energy is infinite. His power is infinite. When we start to think about how such a large-scale creation could happen, we know that it's so because every prophet, every author of a book in the Bible usually says something about the fact that God is forever. And he does not grow tired. And he doesn't just keep all that to himself. He doesn't just sit up in heaven and watch us go about our day and labor against the things he set up against us. No. Those who hope in the Lord will not grow weary. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. In all aspects, if we call upon him, he gives us the energy we need. And so God, in his limitless power, doesn't just let his creation be. He doesn't just let it run like a clock. He has an active hand in what we're doing, in the way that the world works. If you were there for the sermon I got to preach, we talked about how God has set up all these systems, all the gravity is part of what God created. The way that boats float they float because of the way that God made the earth is All these things that we start to come to understand of how the few things we can understand how nature works is all part of God's plan. It didn't just start working that way because, oh, look, these things happen to work together real nice. No, he set it up that way. And in that same way, he made us to work in such a way, but he knows that we have limits, that our stamina, that our bodies are mortal, that they will eventually start to run out, and yet he still has an infinite amount of backup energy for us. All we have to do is call upon it. All we have to do is ask. In times of great struggle, when we need time, when we need peace, when we need energy to get out of bed in the morning, he's there. All he asks of us is just to call upon him. To know that when someone lifts us up, when someone gives us support, when we feel a sudden burst of energy through the day, that it's not because, oh, our body ignored the laws of nature and suddenly gave me a burst of energy. We know that that comfort that we rely on comes straight from the Lord himself. And any other thoughts about Isaiah, about the words that he spoke, about those who call upon the Lord soaring on wings like eagles? Yeah.
You know, first of all, he is God, the I am, all-knowing, and we got to go through this earth. We got to be down here and make our way to the finish line. But without him, you know, he whispers things to be. I mean, he's all-knowing, and to think that we can go through life without him down here, that's just absurd. That's my belief. That's what my faith. But it's I've experienced things where God is almighty. I can't deny that.
Being a nurse, I had the privilege of observing a bypass surgery on the heart. And the machine that had to do the pumping of the heart was half the size of this wall up here. And when you stop and think about that, and step back and think about how the body was created and how everything does itself and how man has been able to fix things, but yet it takes something that large to do the pumping of this small organ that we have.
Yeah.
I was in awe of that. And so, it helps me when I get low or something like that and get mad at God or whatever, to step back and think, I saw this and the creation that was there, and it helps me soar on my wings with God.
Yeah. Yeah, if you ever want to see God at work, go to a hospital. It is incredible. Some people that are just coming in for a routine illness, some people on the last legs of their life. People dealing with cancer or infectious diseases, horrible things. And yet, in my own personal experience, I'm the person who wheels them to the next surgery, to the next procedure. And they're asking me how my day is. How are you doing today? And it's just in those moments that without God, hospitals are the most dismal, awful places imaginable. And yet you have people that seem to have such a sunny disposition, and you know that they know that there's something not only beyond the hospital, but that there's someone comforting them in the hospital as they're dealing with this. Yeah, so I get that so much. Any other thoughts? All right, well, as we're kind of coming to the end here, we kind of had a bit of an introduction section and then a bit of our first dive into the first aspect of God. But as we go throughout this, we're remembering that the three parts that we're looking at are vastly different, and yet we know that they all come from the same source. That God is even above the titles of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And yet, he works in such complex ways that even as unfathomable as creation, as the way that God works is, even more so is the fact that this is not the entirety of how God is. And so as we continue our study for this next however long amount of time, we're going to be looking at, and again, starting with creation is a big thing to jump on, but there is infinitely more to look at. And so kind of how I want to wrap up this morning is I kind of want to have a discussion of what are the other aspects of God the Father that come to mind when you think about God the Father, looking beyond creation. Yeah.
As his children. So as a child, if something bothers you, you can go to your father,
Yep.
both on earth and to God the Father.
Yeah. When you think
And
God,
that's what he wants.
yes, and that is you absolutely on the nose. Next week's study is going to be God the Father. When we think of God the Father, we think of being, the head, being the leader, being all these things. But yeah, God the Father, Father in the most literal sense, being a parent to us, is in the same vein of he didn't just create things and peace out. He didn't just set things the way they are and then leave. He's actively guiding us, teaching us in the way that a father would. Yeah. God is love. Yeah, the way that, again, it's not just, even though he calls himself the Father, that is something that would bring us most comfort, something that we can tangibly understand as people. That we know what fathers are, we know what a parent is, and we know how the relationship works. But God's love for us goes even beyond that of a parent. It is, do you ever feel a bond with something you've made? If you've written an essay for a long period of time and you slaved over it and you typed all the words and you went through it and you changed some words and you restructured how it is, you almost start to feel a connection with it. It's nothing but words on a page about something that came out of your brain. But even so, you've spent so much time and put so much effort into it, you almost start to feel a connection with this non-existent, non-sentient thing. Imagine even more so when you've made something sentient, when you've made something that can understand you in its basest form, that can have a relationship with you, that can talk to you. Unfortunately, I have not had that experience, but to have that experience, yeah, that would go beyond the effort of writing something, of making a cake, or something of that nature. But to have something that can love you, that can share that understanding of you, yeah, that goes beyond parent. That is creator and thing that was created. Yeah.
God is three, but one. They're, and that's very hard to understand, to me, how they think the same, breathe the same, but yet they're separate two entities, because it talks about God the Father and the Holy Spirit. So the cohesiveness of God is the power that's there. To me.
Yeah. And it's what fuels everything. It's what makes creation the way it is. It's how we are saved and redeemed by Jesus, by God sending a physical manifestation of himself down to teach us and to lead us and to ultimately be a sacrifice for us. And this untangible traveling force, this spirit that rests on us in our daily lives, that keeps an eye on us and makes sure that we are taken care of, that we are, in whatever happens in our lives, that we know that his being is still working in our lives. But that's something to look forward to, yeah.
And he doesn't faint or grow weary.
Exactly. Just as it just talks about, there is no limit to the distance, to the amount of time, to any, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, any measurement. There is no limit to how far, to how long, to how much power the Lord can give us and the Lord has. Yeah.
I think, we're going to get into this over the next several weeks, of course, but another thing for everybody to keep in mind is faith doesn't require complete understanding of everything about God.
That's a big aspect of faith, is believing in something that you don't know anything about.
Right. And some people get trouble because they can't quite understand, and that affects their faith, but it doesn't have to. And God's okay with that.
Yeah.
You know, what you're able to believe, He's fine with. Well, it's right. You're believing the right thing. But that your understanding will grow as time passes,
Right.
and your faith will deepen. But if you just have a little bit of like fingernail, you know, you're clinging to it, that's okay. Just go with it. Keep at it. It'll be all
Yeah.
right.
Faith has many looks, but none of them are necessarily wrong. Faith is letting go, and faith is holding on to. But in both ways, sometimes both is required. As backwards and oxymoronical as that sounds. But we are very blessed to come from a context of faith being something that is a part of our relationship with God. Man has this deep need to understand, a deep need to be in control. That is just human nature, that we want things to work the way that we want them to. Because that's just how our brains work. Our brain, when it can't comprehend, wants to control. Wants to be able to hold on to something and to say, now this will happen because that's what it normally does. And from our side, knowing that so much comfort comes from letting go of that need for control, for that need to be the one that is right. That faith is holding on to what we know to be true, but also letting go of that need to have control of it. If that makes sense, yeah?
People want something tangible, something they can see, something they can feel and touch. And you try to tell someone you believe in God, well, who is God? I mean, they want someone to come through the front door and say, I'm God. You can believe in me. And even when God was man through Christ, people didn't believe.
Didn't understand it.
They didn't understand.
And so they wanted to cling to that control, and that control led to Jesus on the cross, and ultimately still part of God's plan. But we saw the crux of man. We saw the hang up of letting go is one of the hardest things that we can do. When a baby's born into the world, what is the first sense? What is the one comfort that it has when it first enters the real world outside of growing in its mother?
The mother holding
The mother, it can feel the mother's touch holding it. It can hear her voice. It's a voice that it maybe didn't directly hear, but it heard as it was growing, subconsciously hearing this voice that is always around. And even in our earliest moments, we grow up leaning on those things we can hear, the comfort that we get from touch, from hearing, from sound. And so that is why, faith outside of the religious context is hard. Because our entire world is built, human world is built around what we can sense. And then it's that step over the line into letting go of the comfort that comes from the senses, from what we can touch, smell, hear, taste, and moving into what we understand in the Bible, what we believe. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. It's a great way to put it. We're still got a few minutes here, but any other final thoughts as we're wrapping up? Yeah.
I have a thought based on the last thought, was
Yeah.
that the, need to understand everything tangibly was kind of the root of human downfall, was the need to, the want to be like God.
Yeah.
So,
Adam and Eve in the garden with the
Right.
snake.
yep,
Said you'll be just like God if you just eat this apple.
Yep.
Oh, well, how can that be bad? I want to be like God. It didn't come from I want to spite God. I don't want to do what he says, but they were tricked into thinking that, do this thing and you will be able to understand that. You'll be able to understand how he did all of this and everything. Yeah, that need for understanding didn't come from a place of evil. It came from the snake, who was evil. But no, that need to understand is kind of the root of all of our problems. And yet, the letting go of understanding is what sets us free. And if all this sounds really backwards and convoluted, it's because it is. It's one of those things that we constantly kind of strive for with our belief, with our religion, but we take comfort in the fact that there have been countless people before, and there will be countless people afterwards that will believe and will strive for that same level of understanding. And part of us being together as the church is we are not one person who understands the Lord as well as good as we possibly can. Pardon my clunky words. But when we come together as a church, our understanding grows exponentially. Because just like a rope isn't just one piece of cord, it's many pieces of cord strung together to be stronger than it ever could be by itself. And that's the strength of the church, is uplifting one another, and it is understanding together, is getting all of our thoughts, and that's why I love discussion-based class, is all the things that you guys catch that I might not have in my studies, that then we can go down another thread of understanding. And we work together as the church, not only to understand God, but to worship God. Because as we'll talk a little bit more in our next lesson of God the Father, is that we have that relationship. So something to look forward to next week. But we'll cut it there. Thank you all for a wonderful class.